What's up, everyone? Welcome to the Gould Mine podcast. In today's episode, I have the great privilege of interviewing David Pere from Military to Millionaire. This guy started investing in real estate with $0 to his name. He had just served his time in the Marine Corps and has since gone from broke to owning 100 plus units in real estate. And he's in contract right now on another 100 plus units. This guy's the real deal. And in this episode, we go into a lot of different things. We talk about how he got started in real estate investing, what prompted him to start his real estate mastermind that is geared towards military service members. And as well, we also talk about some of the creative financing deals he's been a part of, the hotel that he's currently in contract on. So there's a little bit of something in there for everyone. You want to tune in. This guy knows his stuff. So without further ado, from Military to Millionaire, David Pere. David, welcome to the Gould Mine.
I love it. Welcome. Thank you.
Episode number 1.
Woo!
You are the first guest, baby.
Man. And I appreciate you being flexible with me. I'm going to at least shout out to everybody that it's like 6 a.m. your time right now. So you woke up to do this because we were like, hey, let's make this happen. And I'm like, well, shoot, I'm catching an airplane. It has to be early in the morning. And you were like, done. So I appreciate it.
Of course, man. Hey, you know what? Got to be committed, baby.
That's it.
Got to be committed.
That's it.
So, yeah, man. Well, let's dive into it, David, because I've been following you on social for a little while now, and I've seen some of your stuff. So let's start here. You talk about survival bias and how bad things happen for you, not to you. How has adversity shaped you as a person and also as an investor?
Yeah, there we go. That's a real lighthearted first question. I love it.
So into it, baby.
I guess first off, right? So for anyone who's listening who doesn't know, survival bias is, I guess, similar to confirmation bias, right? So like confirmation bias is, I believe salads make me fat, so I'm going to go research on Google and find an article that says it to prove that I'm right, even though there's, a million other articles that say you're an idiot, salads don't make you fat. But you found one to support your theory, therefore it's confirmed, right? That's confirmation bias. Survival bias is essentially, it's very similar, but it's basically like the idea that what made somebody survive and or successful, like that's what, like, so let's say, we'll use cancer as an example. Let's say you got cancer and you're like, I'm going to go holistic, do the whole natural, whatever, and it works and you don't have cancer, you don't die. Well, that's great. But how many people did the holistic approach and then didn't make it? That one person doesn't necessarily prove that, oh, chemo is the worst, like that's, I guess, kind of the idea. Or the other concept as it relates to like business would be the CEO succeeded because he took major risks and they worked out for him. Well, how many people took those major risks and got wiped off the face of the earth? Like that's not necessarily what made that person successful. It's just people think like, oh, well, he did this and he made it. And they forget about like luck and opportunity and like all these other things that play in. It's like, well, just because you made it to the top and you did these things doesn't mean like that these things are why you made it to the top. There's a lot of people who did the same things and didn't succeed or whatever. So it's that, like, just kind of understanding the idea that we all are hardwired to bias. And when you see, oh man, this guy made $1 million doing this, like, well, yeah, but he might have also gotten super lucky. It's the same reason people rush to like crypto when everybody's making money doing crypto. No, you're just seeing the people who are making money doing crypto, because the ones who didn't aren't publicly blasting like I lost my shirt. And don't get me wrong, I love me some crypto, but like that's kind of the concept, right? So as far as your adversity, dude, I've had some fun along the way. I had a 4.5-year lawsuit about one of the properties that I owned. I did an entire Bigger Pockets episode on it where, I got to learn the entire legal system through that and realize that, hey, if I want to keep investing, I got to stick it out. I've had contractors, I've had the typical like contractor just fail to finish a job and cost you money or steal from you. And it's just kind of understanding the fact that like that stuff happens to everybody. And the more you talk through real estate, the more you realize like everybody loses money on their first flip or second flip or at some point on a flip. And everybody loses money on, whatever. There's all these different struggles, and it's just realizing like you've got basically two options when something hits you in the face. You either like, oh, woe is me, I'm a victim, or you're like, well, what are we going to do about this? How could we have avoided this? How could we get around this? How could we work our way through it? And what you find is that if you make it through whatever that adversity is and you get to the other side, that you're almost always in better shape, or at least you have the knowledge to avoid whatever that was, right? And I've had, issues with employees that I thought, and I've had to wrestle with that very same bias at times where it's like, oh, I had this employee do XYZ. It's like, well, no, you didn't set up the paperwork correctly to ensure that didn't happen. You didn't talk to an attorney beforehand. So just learned a lot of lessons the hard way, I guess is the real short answer to that.
What you're talking about is something that my business coach talks to me a lot about, which is self-responsibility, right?
Yeah.
So would you argue then that the difference between someone who takes risks, for example, right, and succeeds in business or in investing versus someone who takes risks and doesn't is the act of self-responsibility if and when mistakes happen along the way?
Yeah, I think if you boil down, the self-responsibility or the buzzword being extreme ownership, and then so that concept, and then if you add in some grit, right? Like that's probably the combo. I think is for longevity. It's can you withhold a few of those things going south, and if or withstand a few of those things going south, and if so, are you going to, right? Like if you make it through all that stuff, then and you keep going, like eventually something's going to pan out in your favor. You just got to be able to withstand the things that don't.
You own over 100 rental units now. Yes.
Yeah.
So that doesn't happen by accident.
Sometimes.
Let's talk about it. Very rarely.
Yeah.
And talk to us about that journey. Like, where did it all start and what got us to this point?
Yeah. 2015, I was handed the book Rich Dad, Poor Dad. Somebody was trying to get me into Amway. And, I was like, I don't read. And he's like, well, here's the audio book on a CD. Why don't you drive a lot, so why don't you listen to it? I was like, okay, fine. Like, you got me. I'll do exactly that. And I took it, I listened to it, and it changed the trajectory of my life, right? That's such a simple book, and it's funny because people get all wrapped up around like whether or not Kiyosaki it's a true story or not, and I would say it's obviously not, but who cares, because he takes a boring subject and makes it something that you can enjoy listening to. And so I listened to the book, lit a fire, and then I found Bigger Pockets, I found a bunch of other real estate stuff, and I decided to do the house hack, right? So you buy a duplex, you live in one half, you rent the other. I'm on my third weird version of a house hack right now, and I love that strategy. Like that is I think, single best way to get started in real estate is if you can buy a fourplex with an FHA or VA loan, and you can have your tenants paying the vast majority of your mortgage while you're learning to be a landlord, learning about depreciation, learning about the basics of investing. And you're not like, you have to pay to live somewhere anyway. So if you can cut your living expense even in half and you're still paying a little bit while learning all this stuff, and your tenants are paying your principal down, like that's a win to me, especially in a market like where you guys are, where it's like, hey, look, dude, here's the secret to success. Don't lose the property, because over time it's going to double or triple in value. It's really that easy. Make your damn payments and you'll be fine. I mean, let's be real, right? Like in Silicon Valley, like real estate's not cheap, and it is going up in value. And even a 6%, like the national average, appreciation on real estate over time, when you're already talking about $1 million house, like that adds up real fast. And even if you're at 2% of that or whatever, right? Like that's still 20 grand a year in appreciation on $1 million home. And if you're making your payment and enjoying that benefit while learning about landlording, that sounds way better than paying rent. So anyway, so I did the duplex hack. And then the next thing was we bought like 5 acres of vacant land, which wasn't necessarily an investment, but it was behind my house so that we could have 10 acres. And then, and then we had some cows. So we grew a little bit to where we had some more cows, and the cost of selling the beef, paid for the mortgage. So it wasn't really an investment, but it cash flowed, which was pretty funny. And then, man, it went from there. It went kind of crazy. It was like we bought a 10 unit, and then I went for this 40, which ended up in a lawsuit, and then flipped a couple houses along the way to cover costs through that time, and then got to where we were going back for more big stuff. So in 2020, early 2021, late 2020, I started doing wholesaling, and the intent was, I actually not hate wholesaling, but I hate how busy it is. Like, you have to always be feeding the beast. And the intent was like, okay, if I can keep one out of every 3 or 4 properties that we wholesale or flip, then, and the other ones pay for that, the marketing, keep the marketing costs alive and pay for the one that I hold on to, then I'll be able to grow my portfolio faster. And I did that for about 2.5 years, 2 years, and it worked great. I mean, we were doing, first year we only did 12 transactions. It was in the last half of the year. The second year we averaged 4 deals a month, and I kept probably 1 out of every 4 to 6 of them. And so, I went from 8 single families to 16 single family houses over the course of a year. And then I ended up, ultimately, I've sold a decent amount of those, and I'm back down to I think 8 single families. But in that process, we also found with one mailer, this dude called me and he's like, yeah, but I want to sell everything if I'm selling it to you. And so we bought 79 doors from one dude, and it was a 40 unit hotel, a 23 unit apartment, a 15 unit apartment, and then the single family that I sent the letter to. We sold the single family immediately. We just sold the 15 unit apartment last week, and we've still got the hotel and the 23 unit. And so that's been kind of the move. I mean, and then I've got, the last piece of the journey, right? I've been selling some stuff to consolidate and go for bigger things. So we're closing at the end of this month on a 130 unit hotel in Townsend, Tennessee, right outside Smoky Mountains. And then, so we did, a $3.5 million raise for that. And then there's, an RV park. I have a 10% ownership stake in an RV park. When you say things don't just fall in your lap or don't just happen, literally a friend called me one day. He's like, Joe, check this deal out. I was like, oh, that looks sick. He's like, I need $100,000. I'm like, okay, I got a guy. I'll get you $100,000. And called a buddy. Buddy's like, yeah, I'm in. Deal looks great. And then they gave me 10% for making the intro. And the only other thing I did was my guy created the LLC, my asset protection dude. And I brought the lender to the deal because I have a really strong relationship with a super local portfolio lender that goes 85% loan to value on everything. So we were able to get in for 15% down on a $500,000 RV park that we've now tripled the gross revenue of in the first year and a half of owning. And then the only other thing I've really done is the Google business profile, but I didn't bring any capital. I might have 5 or 6 hours into that thing over the last 18 months. And, I got a 10% stake of what would probably appraise in the $1 million range right now. RV park is bringing in on average $10,000 a month gross. So,
wow.
Yeah,
that's awesome, man. So you skipped over, or you kind of very briefly went over this. So I want to rewind a little bit. Off of one postcard, you ended up finding basically a portfolio seller.
Yeah.
That's incredible. So what was the original intent of the postcard? Was it to buy a single family home that he owned? Was it to buy a duplex or a multifamily that he owned? What was the original intent?
Yeah, we were looking for, essentially that, right? We were looking for, man, that town, it's a podunk town. If anyone's familiar with Missouri, it's Buffalo, Missouri. So it's like a 2,100, 2,200 person small town. But what happened is I had been doing, some wholesaling, a lot of direct mail, a lot of, and there's all these different lists you target, right? You have, everybody knows absentee owners with equity, they don't live in state, especially if they inherited the property, they might not want it, all that stuff. But then you start throwing in I used this tool called REI Sift, and it like stacks all your lists together. So you can pull a list of the dangerous properties in town and the people who have tax liens or they're at risk of going to tax auction, foreclosures, pre-foreclosures, divorce, probate, uh, out of state, like all these different things. And you can basically slap every individual list into the system and it stacks them. And then it'll be like, hey, these 6 houses have pinged on 4 of your things. And so then you're like, here's a house where they haven't paid their taxes, they're in pre-foreclosure, they don't live in the state, they have equity, and it's vacant, whatever, right? Because they also sort, they get the post office anytime someone updates that they moved out. Until someone updates that they moved in, the post office will ping that as a vacant property for that system. And so you could get like this list and be like, these are the 5 houses that I need to bug the heck out of. Anyway, so I'm doing a lot of direct mail, a lot of stuff, cold calling, and my cold callers were fast. Like they could get through like 10,000 calls in a month. And so it was like 2 guys, and it was nuts. Maybe it was, we had a third for a little while, but that person wasn't really any good. So, but they could get through a ton of names. And so I got to this point where I'm like, dude, I've exhausted, or maybe not exhausted, but I've hammered the Springfield area. Let me hit some of these smaller towns that no one's really marketing to and see what happens. One of which was this town called Bolivar, and Bolivar's just west of Buffalo, and it's probably 10,000 people. It's got a SBU. It's got like Southwest Baptist University or whatever, and I landed like 3 or 4 deals there, and each one of them was between a $15,000 and $25,000 assignment fee. And I was like, oh shoot, some of these small towns have some wiggle room. So I'm like, well, let me try Buffalo, Missouri. So I just hit every absentee owner in Buffalo. I didn't do any kind of crazy searches. It's 2,000 people, so it was like maybe 500 people on the list, and I've pinged them probably 3 times. And yeah, this dude just called, and he's like, yo, I've got this house, but if I sell it, I'd really like to move to Florida and just be done. So I need to sell everything. And I was like, well, what's everything? And he thought I was, he's like, oh, we'll talk a few times. And if I get the vibe that you're serious or you actually do real estate, then we'll talk and we'll figure it out. I'm like, okay, whatever. And, man, I talked to him like 3 or 4 times on my lunch break, sitting in my car in California. And finally he starts telling me more and more about these properties. And, then one day, we jumped on it. We put $100,000 down as a lease option to take over the hotel. Had a 60-day due diligence on the other 3, and then it was like 4.5 months until we actually took over the hotel, and we ran with it. Hotel has been a pain in the ass, but it's coming around. We've probably put $200,000 into capex, and we're at a point now where we're up 28% year over year on revenue. So it's starting to crank out finally. But man, that first 1.5 2 years, it was like, oh yeah, this is totally not real estate investing. This is way different. This is a business. Like we've hired and fired the whole team 3 times. What the hell? So yeah, it took us a while to bring in like an actual manager to the property who knew what they were doing and kind of start making progress on it.
Is there a flag on that one, Brandon?
Not yet, no. That's part of the issue is, it was built as a Comfort Inn. They lost their flag. And then that person, it ended up being foreclosed on. This guy, Tom, took it over, and he wanted to turn it into assisted living. But the city said, no, like that's our only legit hotel. And so then he was like, well, I don't want to do it if it has to be this active all the time. And that's kind of when I had hit him with a mailer. And so he was already getting fed up with it. Granted, his numbers were a little off. So we probably overpaid by, 50 to 100 grand, but, in the grand scheme of things, it's whatever. We're locked into a 4.78 fixed for 25 years on it, and it'll buff.
Yeah, that's beautiful, because a lot of people who bought around that time do not share similar,
not similar financing. Yeah. Yeah, they're like, oh my God, my balloon's coming up for my this and that, and this interest rate's going to break the deal. And I'm like, well, maybe you should have underwrote for that.
Yeah. Yeah. It's very true. It's the self-responsibility part.
Don't buy with a lower cap rate at your exit than your purchase and just anticipate like, the market will bail me out. No. No, it won't. Not always.
Yeah. That's great, man. So the 130 unit, and I'm curious because that's my main focus is hotels. So the 130 unit or 130 key, I guess you want to say.
Yeah, yeah.
What is that? Is that branded? That's in Tennessee.
No, it is not. It does not have a flag. It is.
No.
It has. It's an interesting property, and since you know the hotel business, you'll appreciate that it's owned by Patel. So that's anyone who's listening who doesn't get that. Basically, every hotel in the world is owned by somebody named Patel. I don't know what it is about the Indian culture and hotels, but it is like there's two, maybe three Facebook groups that are named like the one that we found our manager in. The Facebook group is named Hotel Motel Patel, and we posted the job there, and we found it not a Patel, but a gentleman and his wife to come manage the. And there's like 15,000 people in that group. And then there's another one that's even bigger. It's like 40 or 50,000. And it's called like Patel Hotels or something like that. So it's like the running joke in the hotel community for anyone listening is like, but this is legitimately owned by somebody last name Patel. And the style with a lot of that culture is that they buy a hotel and they live in it, or they manage it themselves, which is great. It's not always great though, if that makes sense. So like it works great for them, but when they sell the hotel, and when if they were a really good operator, great. And so a lot of these guys end up with 20, 25. We just got an offer on our hotel from somebody who wants to put a Wyndham flag on it, and last name Patel. He's done 25 flag conversions, and so like obviously he knows what he's doing. Right. This guy, the Google business page isn't finished. The booking.com, like all the third-party booking systems have the exact same pricing as their own website instead of being raised a little bit to incentivize coming back to the website. There's not really a social media presence. You'll appreciate that. We went out when Blake went out to do due diligence on it. There were, on one of his like 3 or 4 trips, there were 2 employees manning the hotel. So for a 130 unit hotel, you would think you need like at least 3 or 4 just cleaners on staff for turning units effectively throughout the day. But they had 2. And the reason is because they just aren't running it super efficiently. And so there's a ton of, not super efficiently, but also they didn't have a ton of rooms booked out because they're not really marketing for it. They don't even have Google ads running for themselves. Just a lot of really basic stuff. Which is just opportunity. So the hotel is 25, 30 years old. Yep. It's 130 keys. It is 3 pools, 3 hot tubs, one of which for each of those is indoor. The other 2 are outdoor. It's got a ton of, it's beautiful. It is like 2 miles from the Smoky Mountains, so you can see them. So it's like right outside the national park, which is, the most heavily trafficked national park in the country. By far. In fact, 2/3 of the U.S. are within a 1-day drive of it, which is like population wise, which is why it gets hit so much. And then it's not in Gatlinburg or Pigeon Forge, which are the big, buzz towns. So they call this the peaceful side of the Smokies. And then for anyone who's like a car enthusiast, it's 26 miles from the tail of the dragon start, which is, like 300 turns and 11 miles. It's the most notorious stretch of road for drivers. It's got a wedding center and like a convention center that'll hold like 150 guests, and then it has a
on-site
on-site, and then it's got like a main cabin that will sleep like 10. It's like a 3 or 4 bedroom like cabin that you could rent out, which I guess is what the Patel was living in for a little while, but that's another revenue source. And then it's just a unique place. Like 5, maybe 6 of the units have like a jacuzzi in the middle of the room. Like it's like a typical like hot tub, like love, like honeymoon suite where it's like bed, couch, middle of the room is massive jacuzzi, and it's like, all right, the bathroom just has a toilet and that's it. Like we're getting it on in public here, I guess. So it's so we're gonna go in. We've got about I think our budget is 1.1 or just shy of 1.1 for renovation, but it doesn't need much other than cosmetic. And then we're going to add some, like pickleball, or there's an outdoor theater that hasn't really been running, so we're going to update that. update, basic cosmetic stuff, bring it to more modern mountain theme. But it's a log cabin. It's 8 buildings, and they're all log cabin style with like the green roof. So really cool looking property, a lot of potential
Yeah.
there, but it's definitely going to be more like the boutique side of that area. I'm excited about it because now that I know a little bit more about the hotel business, my 2 partners have sworn them off, and they're like, we're never touching this again. It's too much work. And then I was like, this deal's awesome. I love this other deal. And so my buddy had it under contract, and I was like, yo, do you need help raising money? And he's like, I don't know. I'll let you know. And then he called me when he did, and he had like $1.5 million left to raise. And we ran a webinar and we raised it. And I was like, sweet. I got, the same thing, right? Like I brought people to a deal. I'm going to get an equity cut, and I'll probably throw $100,000 at this one too. But, because I like it and I like the returns on it. More importantly, I'm just excited about a place near Smoky Mountains that I can stay at. So I'm like, I'm going to go, we'll host my own mastermind event there.
Yes. That sounds like a really unique kind of, they don't have that stuff in California, man.
No, yeah, that's not California style. Maybe by like, I was gonna say maybe by like Yosemite or whatever, but I was conceived there. Random fact for your podcast, in the back of a 1988 Toyota pickup truck in the valley, which I learned the first time I ever brought a girlfriend home for dinner. My parents thought that was a interesting, a welcome dinner topic. I'm like, oh, thanks, guys. Let's embarrass the hell out of me.
Oh man,
now it's hilarious.
Yeah, that's funny. So you had no idea until you brought your first girlfriend.
Yeah, I'm like 16, just driving my car. I'm like, yeah, we're gonna go meet the folks. This is great. And like that was one of the dinner conversations. I'm like, oh my god, at 16, that's an embarrassing thing to hear in front of a girlfriend. But now I'm like, that's freaking awesome. We tell the world. My dad was the man. Oh man, that's it. They picked the right. They planned that. That wasn't on accident. My dad basically grew up in Yosemite. Yeah, that must have been planned. Yeah, so my dad's from my parents. So since you're familiar with the area, right? Like I've got family all over Novato, Petaluma, Bodega Bay.
Yep.
And then I grew up. I was born in Santa Rosa. My parents lived in Novato at the time, but my dad's like from downtown San Francisco. So that was his escape.
Sweet.
Was heading to Yosemite on weekends or whatever.
That's sweet, man. Yeah, no, it's so that's North Bay, and it's beautiful up there. It's cold. It gets pretty frisky, but it's definitely beautiful up there. So switching gears a little bit, since you talked about fundraising, you talked about the webinar that you put on, and I have a feeling, although I'm not 100% sure, that this ties into your tagline, which is "I help service members and veterans build wealth through real estate." So let's talk about that. And if the fundraising is a part of that, great. If it's not, because I do know that you have some courses and stuff online. So I'd love to just hear what that means in terms of helping service members and veterans build wealth through real estate.
Yeah. I mean, it's an evolving phrase, I suppose. So, the brand kind of just started by accident, and we can dig into that if you want. But at one point, I just kind of realized along the journey that it was like, man, people are looking up to me and asking me for advice, and I have a responsibility at this point. I feel like to make sure that the advice I'm giving is really valuable and putting out information and doing all the things. And I got to this place where I just realized, like, okay, that's kind of my calling. Like, I enjoy this. Like, if I can make $10,000 with a rental, or I can make $10,000 helping someone else make $10,000, like, that's way more fulfilling. So how do I figure out how to make that happen? And I had this massive Facebook group that was totally free. And in 2019, we started a mastermind group, and that's probably the main piece of the puzzle, right? So I have a mastermind with like 230 people in it that is growing fairly quickly, actually, right now. But it's all service members and vets, and we bring in guest speakers. We bring in We have accountability calls. We have 3 calls a week. We have just a bunch of different things that tie into helping people get to where they want to go, right? So we don't hone in on a specific niche. We talk broad strokes on everything, and it's more like just an all-encompassing community for service members and vets who want to learn more and really be involved in a like hopeful, I guess, beneficial veteran community, and then still enjoy that community feeling, because that's something that a lot of people miss when they get out of the military. And then we bring in speakers about everything. And so we've got master classes on wholesaling, multifamily, Airbnb. We've got guys in there who are doing, I mean, literally any, I don't think there's a strategy or niche of real estate that's not got somebody in that group covering it or crushing it, from development to any asset class to, I mean, we've got active duty guys running 7-figure wholesaling companies in there. We've got some 8-figure owners and stuff. But ultimately it's just fostering this community to, help with all that. Now, yeah, I've got some courses. Most of what I do, though, honestly, is just free content, podcast, YouTube, whatever, just helping people get out of their head, out of their own way, and realize like what's possible. The fundraising piece, I guess, it could and should probably tie into that. It's kind of a one-off that I've done a few times. And, it's a plus or minus, because it's like I say plus or minus. It's cool on different wavelengths, because when you raise money to help someone with a deal, like I presented basically $1.5 million or $1 million whatever to this guy, like, hey, here you go, this will finish out your raise, you don't have to worry about it anymore. That's awesome. So I helped him out. But more importantly, the guys who are lending the money on that, like, or investing in that, the return on that thing is going to be probably 3x multiple in 5 to 10 years. So if you think through that, somebody lends $500,000 and they get 1.5 back in 10 years. Like, that's awesome. And honestly, the returns are probably going to be less than 10 years. The play is 36 months later, we'll refi and have all of the initial capital back to everybody. And then it'll just be, waterfall returns from there. And, but that's helping out guys, so one of those investors is a friend. One of those investors is in the community. The guy I'm buying the property with is in the community. I haven't decided if that's going to be like a full big leg of it, or just kind of one-off when I get excited about a deal. Cause I don't like to raise unless I'm excited. Like if I'm legitimately a GP member and excited enough about it to put my own money into it.
So, and that makes a lot of sense to me. I want to go back to the military millionaire community then. So that's the name of the mastermind.
The mastermind's called the War Room, but the military millionaire community is like the whole encompassing everything.
Okay. So you've got War Room, which is your mastermind, 230 students. And the military millionaire community is your Facebook group. And
that's everything else.
Free and accessible to like everyone that's like interested in learning more about real estate investing. So I'm curious, what was the catalyst? So obviously you're like, hey, I feel a responsibility to help people because people are asking me questions, they're paying attention, that sort of thing. That's great. But what was there like a specific catalyst that drove you to focus specifically on helping, fellow military members? Like what was it that like inspired that you to follow through on that niche?
Yeah, so the storyline for how this thing started is that I have from my deployment in 2010, I kept a mission log and a journal. So like, how that correlates is like I can look and say like, hey, in fact, I just did it actually. Look at this. I just sent a personal statement off for a buddy to help him get his. So I like screenshot stuff to send in to he's trying to get his Purple Heart. And I went in and I screenshot like stuff from that day. He's like, hey, you were there on the day that we both drove over an IED. I'm like, yeah, I was. He's like, can you write a statement? I'm like, yeah, I can do one better than that. I've got like literally this is written in 2010, right? Like 0745, Vic 2, me hits an IED while going to charge up Vic 4's battery. 0810, Vic 1, this guy hits IED while sweeping the record for us. And then I wrote FML. That's the kind of, you can tell it's me. And then like, this is actually kind of funny that I can like read through some of this crap. And then I've got like my thoughts, right? So, I mean, I'm not going to read all that because that's a lot, but like I've got my thoughts about that day in a journal entry. And I don't know who it was that convinced me that I should keep a journal and a mission log. But I'm eternally grateful because a lot of my friends are like, dude, I wish I knew. Like, I'm like, I can look back and tell you exactly what I was thinking the day that I drove over my first IED and how I felt. And I can tell you I was really pissed at the guy who told us we should take that route after I told him, no, that route's bad. And then I was right. He was wrong. All that being said, I asked a buddy, I was like, hey, I'm going to write a book. I was like, all these Navy SEALs write books, but nobody who had like a normal job in the Marine Corps or whatever writes books. It's not like, I was a truck driver and we just kind of drove around and did stuff. But like, we have some funny stories from the deployment. And I'm like, dude, people would probably read a book where it's like, hey, this is what normal dudes did, not just SEALs. And so I'm asking a friend, like, how do you learn to write? And he was like, start a blog. I'm like, okay, what should I blog about? He's like, I don't know, dude, you're in the military, you buy houses. There's nobody who really talks about that. You should talk about it. I'm like, okay. So I just started documenting what I was doing, what I was learning. And I didn't even come up with the name Military Millionaire. A friend of mine, Joel, did. And it just caught on. Like, it was like over time, it went from like, hey, I learned this thing to like people asking questions. And I'd be like, oh, let me go research that. I've heard that question like 4 times. Let me go dig into that. And then I'll put some content out about it. And then people would share it. And then it would go and do its thing. And it grew because of that. And it was probably like 2 years in that I was just like, oh, hang on. This is a business and I should probably treat it as such instead of just like a hobby. And then it really started to take off. And so, we've got over 250,000 people throughout all the socials, 62,000 in the Facebook group. And it's just free content that we pump out to answer questions. I mean, then it became like Dave's kind of the expert on the VA loans, which I'm not. I'm pretty knowledgeable, but I also partnered with guys who are actual experts so that if I have questions, I'm like, yo, Chris, help me, like whatever. And then, at some point it just, as far as like why I stuck with that, I mean, the big group and everything is open to anybody, right? 80% of what we talk about is applicable to everybody. If I'm talking about the thrift savings plan, like replace TSP with 401k and ta-da, like the strategy is the same. It's just different names, like nuanced stuff, the VA loan, everything I talk about the VA loan, if you put FHA and you put 3.5% down, it's pretty much the same thing. There's just a lot of nuanced benefits, but then it really just kind of boiled down to like, everyone says the riches are in the niches. And I was like, man, I've got this niche that people love and I enjoy helping and I relate to, so I'm going to rock and roll with it.
So it sounds to me like you have a lot of love for, and a lot of great, like there's a piece of nostalgia that's there with you, right? And so like that, because I mean, I know plenty of service members, and by the way, thank you for your service. You're ex-Marine, yeah? Yeah,
I'm a Marine.
Are you still active duty, or are you off, or like what do they? Sorry, I'm not super familiar with military. Like, so it's like obviously you're not in it, but like then there's like the what's reserves. The next phase after reserves? Thank you.
I am still technically in the reserves, though I haven't had to do anything for the last like year, hence the beard. So I might be changing that up though. I just got an opportunity to take basically a set of orders that would allow me to work out of Hawaii twice a year for 2 weeks at a time, and they'd pay for travel and hotel. So I'm like, I miss Hawaii. That could be fun. Let's do that. So I'm looking at that.
Nice. So, because not everyone when you look at your time in the military and you reflect on the lessons that you've learned, do you feel like there are any integral lessons that you learned throughout your time that are directly applicable and have contributed to your success as an investor?
Oh, yeah. Yeah, I think there's a lot. They're all intangible. I mean, don't get me wrong. There's some tangible stuff, sure. But most of the good stuff is intangibles. So the military does a really good job at, for record, I was a super conservative family, religious, missionary, homeschooled kid who was really sheltered, not super confident. I mean, I had some confidence, I guess, but like the military really instilled confidence in me. They instilled discipline. I didn't have any of that. And then they helped me become more decisive. I'm still fairly indecisive. I still struggle with that one, but like they help, in the military, it's like any decision is better than is better than no decision. Like a bad decision doesn't matter. And which kind of teaches you to, pull the trigger on things and just to make a quick decision at, whatever. And so I think decisiveness and discipline are probably two of the strongest, and the discipline being, and or grit, however you want to word it, being the main one, right? I think, when we talk through at the very beginning, that survivor bias and confirmation bias, like the reality is that a lot of that is just grit. If you just stick through it, eventually you'll hit something, right? It doesn't matter. Like what's the old, like even a broken clock is right twice a day. That's an analog clock for everybody who's under like 30 and doesn't know what those are. But yeah,
it's the thing that makes noise, like the center of the town.
There you go. Yeah, one of those. But yeah,
that's interesting. So when you think about your overall thoughts on investing and the way in which you've navigated your investing career, like what is a belief that you have about real estate investing that you would say is an unpopular or contrarian type of view or opinion?
Man, there's a lot of support within the real estate community, so I don't know how much of this is really contrarian, but I'm huge on creative stuff, like creative financing and creative deals, whether that's like what we talked about where I'm getting a piece of the pie for connecting people, or that's straight up seller financing or lease options and rent to own and all that stuff. Mainly seller financing for me. I've done a lot of purchases that way. And I think the thing that I would say is like contrarian maybe is just the belief that with a little creativity and a little like consistency, real estate investing is really not that hard. Like it's a people game. Things come to you. It's just, I don't think people are as committed as they think they are, or they're not as consistent as they think they are. And so they're like, oh, this isn't working. It's like, well, then like change your strategy, change whatever. Like don't be keyholed into one thing and find something that is working. I mean, like you heard me through the portfolio, right? Like I've got single families, I've got duplexes, fourplexes, hotel, apartment, RV park. We tried to buy a mobile home park 2 months ago, but we fell out of contract because of septic crap.
Literally?
Yeah, literally. It was going to cost us more than the purchase price to get the stuff up to what the county wanted for code. That's why you do due diligence. Yep. And all that stuff is buy and hold. That's really the only thing it has in common. But a lot of people get keyholed into like, oh, you got to do this one niche until you're like, no, you don't. You just have to find what works for you. And you can change that. Shiny object syndrome's okay until you figure out what you love. I don't think it's a bad thing.
Speaking of creative financing, what is the most creative deal you've ever been a part of?
Oh, man. All right. The one that kind of blows people's minds that we pulled off. So my best deal ever was that 10 unit. And I bought that one. So this isn't the answer, but this is another good example. I bought that one with only $10,990 out of pocket and some change, because I put 5% down and the seller carried back 10% and the bank carried 85. Wow. So that was really cool. Right. And that was my second deal. And so we bought that thing for $212 and I sold it for $340 4 years to the day later. And I put less than 11 grand into it. And so, that's a sweet, example. But the one that I love telling people about, because we've actually done this twice, is that we've managed to buy properties, for whatever purchase price, no interest, no payments for 12 months. And so like an example is this house that had a fire. The guy wanted to sell it for like 50 and he'd had it sitting around for like a year. and we were stuck at like 34,000, I think was our top number. And
Yeah.
he came down to like 38, and he's like, I won't, like, I can't sell it for any less than that. I gotta, like, that's it. And we liked the location. We liked a lot of things about the deal. We just got to a point. I was like, okay, I can match your 38. But the only way I can do it is if you let me pay you once I sell the property. And he's like, well, what does that look like? I was like, well, it looks like 38,000 seller finance for 12 months with no payments and no interest due until either that 12-month mark or I sell the property. And so we bought this thing, and the only thing I paid on closing day, he was like, oh, I thought that you guys were going to be on the hook for the property taxes, so I didn't have to I at least didn't have to come out of pocket. And I was like, well, that's definitely not what we signed, but it's like $693 or something like that, so I didn't care. So I wrote a check for $693 or whatever to close it out on closing day, and we bought it. And then I didn't pay him until we flipped the house. And now, actually, we went like 3 weeks past the 12-month mark, so I ended up paying him and then selling it. But it was already listed by the time I paid him out, and we've done that twice. That one was probably the most fun because it was this. I went so far over budget and timeline, and I mean that thing was. We were probably $170,000 into that rehab, and the house turned out amazing. And ultimately, I think I broke even. So it's definitely not my best deal, but it is my coolest before and after pictures and the coolest like financing. But the other one that we did it on, we turned that house in 4 months and sold it and made profit and paid him out, and it was beautiful. So that's like my kind of ace in the hole. If I'm like really close to somebody's max offer, but I can't squeak it, I'm like, well, hey man, if you want to just carry the note for the entire time with no interest or payments, then I can flip this house and I can pay you out of the proceeds. And the other way that people do that often is they just say, hey, I'll come in, I'll renovate your house. When I list it, we split the proceeds 50-50. And then that's kind of the agreement on it, is like anything over this agreed upon purchase price, whatever. Either way works. It's just pretty cool to be able to tell people we seller financed a property for no interest and didn't have to make a payment until 12 months later.
You make it sound really easy. A lot of people, when they hear that, are going to be like, how could I ever convince someone?
Yeah. The biggest problem with people doing seller financing is they run around and they just ask they just go like, they're on the MLS and they're like, are you open to seller financing? Are you open to seller financing? Are you open to seller financing? And dude, no one's going to say yes to that unless it's an investor who understands seller financing and comes out of nowhere and they're like, yeah, sure. At 20% down, 6% interest with a 5-year balloon, and we're going to amortize for 25 years. So you're only going to pay interest to me over that time, and you're going to owe the full amount in 5 years. Like, that's a savvy guy. And so nobody's going to jump on that. So you don't do that. That's not the way to do it. Seller financing and creative financing is something you keep in your back pocket when you're talking directly to the seller. And you don't even have to use those words. In fact, I wouldn't. Because like if you go to grandma and you're like, hey, you open a seller financing? She's going to be like, no, I'm going to just list it because I don't understand that. And this sounds like it'll work. But if you go to grandma and you're like, hey, you said you need to move to Florida. You need 10 grand to do it. And you need it this week. What if I gave you 10 grand this week? And then the rest of your property, let's say it's $70,000 purchase. I'll give you 10 grand this week as long as it clears title. That's the only thing I care about. And then I'll make payments to you for $500 a month for the next 10 years. Well, that's 0% interest, $60,000, $70,000 purchase price, 10,000 down, 0% interest payments for 10 years, and you own the property. You just negotiated seller financing, but that person has no idea what you're doing. You're helping them, and you're doing it. You're having a normal conversation. So if you understand creative stuff well enough to have a conversation without having to use all the stupid investor terms, you're going to be able to crush it. That's the secret sauce, is because you're right. Everybody's like, I can't find these deals anywhere. Well, yeah, because you're asking, like you wouldn't go up to an NFL quarterback and be like, yo, drill me in the face with that football. And then be like, oh man, like that really hurt. Like you're asking the wrong people, dude. Go find the right people.
So For the listeners who are listening to this, I want to point something out that I just discovered just in like this conversation with you. You like sneakily didn't really say it, but you said it without saying it, is too many people when they want to go for seller financing go straight to the ask as opposed to building the relationship first.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
And so I feel like that's, just from what I've observed, something that you're probably actually very good at. And then you just couple that with a little bit of knowledge on how to explain it in layman's terms once you've developed a relationship with them, and then suddenly creative financing becomes a lot easier to pitch.
Absolutely. Yeah. Yeah. It's the rapport and like consultative selling, right? Like sales 101 is knowing the need of your client so that you can fit that hole. And not because you're trying to fit the hole necessarily, but like if you don't know what they need, you don't even know if you can help them. And yeah, so people just jump into like, oh, are you open to seller financing on every deal? Mm-hmm. And without explaining it, no one knows what it is, unless they're, like me. And I'm going to be like, oh yeah, absolutely. 20% down, 7% interest, 25-year AM with a 5-year balloon and prepayment penalties out the wazoo prior to that 5-year mark, because I am going to milk the interest payments on that bad boy. I'll take that deal all day. Anybody want to buy my whole portfolio? You can come seller finance it from me right now. I will cash flow that thing while you try to figure out why you bought that way. But yeah, if you take the time to build that rapport and figure out the needs of the seller, and you just have a conversation about how to meet those needs for them, you'll land some pretty cool creative deals.
Reminds me of a podcast I listened to. It was right as I was getting into residential back in 2014. And it always stuck with me, this line. It says, find a need, fill a need, find a need, fill a need. That's the secret to success in real estate.
Yeah.
So pretty much
or anything.
Just described. Yeah, true. Like literally.
Right. Is it Tony Robbins? You get paid in direct proportion to the size of the problems you solve. Maybe that's Musk. One of those guys.
Yeah.
I don't know.
Someone who's influential and famous.
Yeah. Somebody who's made it.
David, we're coming up on time here, man. So we're going to start a little tradition here.
Okay.
Gould Mine. So leave us with one final Gould nugget.
I love that. I love the way that you branded all this. That's great. All right, here you go. So don't take advice. Learn how to filter advice. Don't take advice from people who you wouldn't change spots with, right? So if they haven't achieved what you want to achieve, or they're not actively achieving what you're looking for, and their life doesn't look the way that you want your life to look, then filter out their advice in that area. And the best example I can give for this is, anyone who's listening, your mom, and if your mom's not still around, then input that with whatever person loves you the most, right? Whatever. We're gonna go with mom for this example. My mom loves me. If I wanted to become a professional UFC fighter, I would not consult with my mom. I would go hire like Ray Longo as a striking coach and maybe one of the Gracie brothers to roll with, right? You go find a professional coach in that niche, because your mom loves you and she has your best interest at heart, and she knows nothing about fighting. And so why would you go to her when you go to someone who's legit? And so in that case, your mom's going to be in your ear. Oh, this is dangerous. Don't do it. Oh no, you're going to get hurt. Oh my baby. Oh my gosh. And you're going to ignore it because that doesn't fit your goals. You're going to be like, yeah, hey, I appreciate the advice. I know you love me, but like in this area, I'm working with these guys. Yet for some damn reason, when people get into like real estate, they're like, I'm going to buy a house. And then all your relatives and friends who don't own houses come out of the woodwork, and they're like, but what about the tenants and the toilets? And you're like, oh yeah, great idea. Oh man, that sounds terrible. Okay, I'm out. Rather than like go rub shoulders with David Osborne, who's worth $180 million or whatever he is, I don't know, 100 plus, and who owns one of the biggest Keller Williams franchises in the country, and learn from that guy, because he might know a thing or two. Or Aaron Amuchastegui, who runs Real Estate Rockstars and has 850 rental properties, not doors, houses, 850 plus houses, and flips like 10 or 15 houses a month. Those are the people you should be asking, because they're going to be like, dude, jump in, go for it. I'll teach you the way. And so I just would say the best thing I can tell anyone is like, dude, if you learn how to filter advice, I have different people I listen to and call for different things. You don't call your divorced friends to ask how to save your marriage. You don't call your married friends to ask how to navigate a divorce. Like, it is what it is, right? And so if you can learn how to filter that and say, hey, this person loves me, but they're not an expert here, and then if you get yourself into circles with people who are succeeding in what you want to succeed and surround yourself with the right people, you're going to crush it. You can't fail. You couldn't go to the gym that Arnold, in his Pumping Iron video documentary, if you've ever watched it, where he's like in the gym and it's all the pro bodybuilders in the same gym. If you worked out there every day, you would get in shape. Like, it would happen.
Right.
If the only people you associated with were pro bodybuilders, you're going to succeed at working out. But yet, again, people don't filter their community that way when they get into real estate or whatever. They just go with the flow and read a book, and then they're like, I'm good. Like, nah, you're not. You got to replace some people.
I think that's excellent advice, man. I mean, I think everyone has people in their lives that they take advice from that they probably.
Everyone, absolutely. Yeah.
So that's excellent advice. Well, David, I know you got to run off to the airport here, so I'm gonna let you go. But if people want to find out more about, if we have certain services here, we want to find out more about the Military Millionaire community, the War Room, where can they find you, and what's the best way for them to get in touch?
You'll love this domain. So I own the domain, and I would say go to thebestpodcastguest.com. And if you go to that, so I bought that probably 6 months ago when I did the Bigger Pockets show. So thebestpodcastguest.com, you can get a free PDF download of my book, and then it has all of my socials and the community and everything linked right there.
That's so simple. Wow. Yeah. You're smart, dude.
Oh, it's not my idea. That was not my idea. I was going to do like from militarytomillionaire.com/free book, which I have that link for something else. And my buddy's like, dude, the moment you say / everybody's out. So make it something rememberable that you can say on air and people will be like, oh yeah, what was that thing? Oh, I remember that.
That's awesome, man. Well, David, thank you so much for your time, and you're the man.
Thanks for having me, brother. This was a lot of fun.